being here. Y'all, we know that you have so many options for things to do on your Monday night. You have your TikToks, your Yip Yaks, your chores, your jobs, your TPS reports. So thank you so much for coming here. Sincerely, we really appreciate it. My name is Dr. Clinton Crockett Peters, and this is the David James Poisson Reading Series, the endowed creative writing reading series, named after one of Barry's own, David James Poisson, who came here, he did well, and then he went off and he made us proud. This reading series wouldn't exist without him, and of course, without y'all. And I just want to give a little shout out to Dr. Sandy Meek, who I think was instrumental in bringing it's a small endowment, but we have enough money to bring in a prose writer both in the fall and the spring semester. Next spring is going to be Dr. Kimberly Rose Garza, my friend who's new. I'll say more about tonight's reader in just a second. Here's a time where I'm like, if you guys have funds, you want to cough up some cash, please come talk to me or Dr. Meek. Anything, if you want us to keep bringing in awesome writers like Karen and Kim next semester, if you want us to bring in more, we can do that. Just let us know. And yeah, please if you can. If you're a student, hey students, I know you want some CE credit. Please stick around after the Q&A and get your card scanned, your ID card, by the people back there. You probably know the drill by now. So now comes the time where I introduce Karen Salyer McElmurray.
Okay, do the whole thing together.
Try it Karen, right?
Try it again.
Karen, like many good writers, seeks to fly between two worlds. She writes in her essay collection, Voice Lessons, highly recommend, on sale back there, about returning to Eastern Kentucky after 3 advanced degrees. Her grandfather meets her at the door, looks outside, and asks, why doesn't she drive a better car with so much education? On another day, appearing at a very bougie cocktail soiree for novelists and luminaries, with her blue-collar, well-tanned, yard-working boyfriend, a writer in a satin dress became very concerned, looked at him, looked at Karen, and asked, is he being? Have you all felt this? Caught between worlds, bifurcating loyalties. I remember Lubbock, Texas, my home, the most conservative county by votes in America. And yet, I went to swanky dinner parties where later New Yorkers would ask me if I had ridden a horse to school. McElmurray. Karen was born in Topeka, Crockett.
Should we all do it in unison or something?
Yes. As she writes in her AWP Book Award-winning memoir, Surrender Child, on sale back there, highly recommend. She grew up with an overbearing, OCD-riddled mother who clocked the minutes of Karen's day and bade her stay in the garage after school until she was ready to clean her. Karen couldn't wait to escape her interiority directed outward, even as her mother pressed ever closer. In her new novel, Wanting Radiance, this is amazing, also a narrator lives both in the present, 1983, and exploring the past like a sleuth, searching for her mother's killer. The victim has her own POV, her direction shooting forward as the narrator's time and gaze aims backwards. She writes in Voice Lessons, quote, what could language look like? The tilt of a bird's wing up to the sun, the shadow of a cloud moving forward, the silver tongue of an airplane licking the sky. Memoirs, essays, and novels, like Karen's, are empathy machines as much as they are race bites for lyricism. As she also writes, quote, the power of writing is that I've come to understand there is a coming to consciousness. Writing allows more air into dark places, a gentle stretching of all the scars. Isn't that good? So good. Fiction and nonfiction often seem at odds, but they are two sides of a coin that helps reveal tiny truths of the human condition and ask questions about the so-called truth. Karen's essays have won the Annie Dillard Prize, the New Southerner Prize, the Orison McKin Magazine Anthology Award, and have several times been notable essays in Best American Essays. Her collection of essays is forthcoming from Iris Books. Her newest book is one rated, or is it Voice Lessons?
Voice, that should be it came out from Iris.
Okay, so that's Voice Lessons.
Last-
Voice Lessons we're doing.
But there's another
right
one
now.
I'm done with.
Oh my God, what's that one called?
It's called Long Ride Home.
Long Ride Home. That's a great title. Do you have a update?
Hmm?
Do you have an update?
No.
Okay, I'm looking forward to it. We'll look out for that one. Morning Radiance came out in 2020 from the University Press of Kentucky. Karen also has an MA in creative writing from Holland, an MFA from University of Virginia, and a PhD in American literature from the University of Georgia. She's also won many grants, including one from what's that place called? The arts one. She's won all this stuff. That's great. Karen has also been a writer in residency at Berry College.
Yes, indeed.
A few years ago, and we are so happy to have her here. She came to my class today and was just a hoot. So Karen, thank you so much for coming back. And I'm going to turn it over. Please welcome Karen
Salyer
McElmurray. Okay.
Wow. I already did this earlier, but I have to do it again. My children. I've never been in a pulpit before. I was nervous a little bit already about the reading, but now I'm like, really, my hands are sweating. I'm in a pulpit. Okay, that's over. Thank you, Clint. That was a wonderful introduction. And thank you all. I could see several of you who were in this class earlier. We had such a great conversation in the class and in lunch beforehand. I feel like I really had the chance to get to know the students. Many other thanks. The English department, the David James Poussaint reading series, and most especially Sandra Meek, you get more applause, who has arranged this visit. She's welcomed me to come. I got to pet her dogs. I mean, all wonderful things. Thank you, Sandy, so much. And again, thank yous, many thank yous to all the great students I've met today. Let me applaud for you, okay? Wow, so today, this was before lunch, I guess. What is that loop called? The whole campus? Is it called something?
The mountain campus?
Yeah, we had a chance to ride around and just see so many of the places that I was when I was here before. We saw the old mill, we saw at a distance the Longleaf Pine Trail, we saw the reflecting pond, the trail that went to the reservoir, that goes to the reservoir, and I saw the place where I live, Poland Hall. There's the story, well, we don't want to get into the chains on the wall, but but it was just so much like a homecoming, and I just so appreciate the chance to be here. When I was here before, I'm an old, no, I'm not going to go there. It's 20 years ago now when I was visiting writer, and so much happened that year. My dear Granny Salyer, she's my closest family member, passed away, and I remember spending that day hiking up to the House of Dreams and spending most of the day by myself, sending up blessings for her. But hiking up there, who's hiked to the House of Dreams a lot? Isn't that just the best? I love going there. All the deer, which I got to see today, my two little dogs chasing the deer across fields and getting to see them bound up with the grass. And they got an ACL, one of them got an ACL injury. The thing I was doing here was to write. So I came with a project in mind. I was really kind of just getting to work on a new novel called The Motel of the Stars. But then this thing happened when I was here. This is the other amazing family thing. I had written previously a memoir, which is here, Surrendered Child, that Clint mentioned, and the evil publisher was holding the book, not releasing it, saying things like, this book is our child, not yours, which is a really screwed up thing to say to a birth mother. So they're holding this book, and I'm here, and I started to work on the novel, and then one day I go and check my email, and what it says, there's an email from a woman named Jenny, and she says, I am my fiance, and I just looked at your book and saw pictures of you, and some dates in there match up. My fiance has often wanted to meet his birth mother, and so that's what happened, and he came here to meet me. It was pretty amazing, you know, the place we sat, trying to forgive each other a little bit. It was the reservoir where I saw the path today. So that's the history of Surrendered Child, and I don't know who knows that story, but if you read the end of this book, I want to read a little bit of that, and some of your dearly beloved professors and family are in this. Is that okay, Jim? Okay. This is afterwards, after I've met him, and well, it's actually the day of meeting him in Poland Hall. It's late February of 2002 when I meet my son for the first time. I can't sit still, and I'm pacing. I've managed to play hand after hand with crazy eights with John, who I wed in December, and who's come at last to live with me and start our lives together. It's a Saturday, and Jenny and Andrew have promised to drive from Lexington, Kentucky to Mount Airy, Georgia, where we'll have dinner, an acquainted reunion. Such an event is called by adoption discussion groups on the internet. It's one of the stages of adoption, the professionals say. Surrendering of parental rights, reunion, aftermath. Self-help books describe all such rites of passage in the world of adoption. The book also offers advice on all the residual effects, everything from anxiety to relationship difficulties to poor self-esteem. Between card games with John, I scour my adoption collection for other books, flyers, organization magazines. I've even clipped quotes I like best. Adoption loss is the only trauma in the world where the victims are expected by the whole of society to be grateful. Nowhere do I find any specific advice on how to greet the son I've never seen. Andrew and Jenny promised to leave Lexington early, and I've imagined early as synonymous with eagerly. I'm so eager myself that I've been up since 5, cleaning the apartment, filling the bathroom walls with tiny glowing dark stars that seem like the perfect light touch for a visit from the child I got away when I was 15. I imagine Jenny and Andrew early too, 6:30, 7:30 at the latest, for the 5.5-hour drive south. I have the timing down to a science, of course. If they left at, say, 8, by noon they'll be in Chattanooga, which gives them an hour and a half, 2 hours with lunch to drive from there. By 4:30, then 5, I'm biting my cuticles until they bleed. We've gone from crazy eights to spades and back again. The cards slap down, the suits switch, hearts to diamonds to clubs, and I'm aware of how old the day is. The card's soft and pliable. I feel soft and pliable myself since I started sipping Shiraz, my favorite red wine, about 2. I'm managing to be calm, I tell myself. I'm together enough to ration my eights from every suit, save them up for the last 2 cards so there's no turning back, and I'm sure to win. John is letting me win. He's letting me win, fetching me more wine, lapsing into frustration because I'm hopeless, I tell him. It's been almost 30 years, and this, I say, is what Andrew will find. And I mean a 40-year-old nervous wreck, nail-biter without a home. This, John says, stroking my hair, this is what you'll find. Just after 5, I head down to the yard to talk to my neighbors, Jim and Susan. The whole family's there, the 2 kids, their out-of-town guests, and Annabelle, the dog. Everyone's playing touch football, and I linger at the outskirts, feeling like an uninvited guest. Annabelle is a Carolina dog, and she races in circles and leaps after the ball as the kids kick it. All of them, even Annabelle, know the importance of this day. On Thanksgiving, after Andrew's email, John and I ate turkey and stuffing with Jim and Susan, and all of us speculated on what Andrew would be like. He'll look just like his mother, one of them said that day, and I felt all of them looking at me, waiting to see how I respond to the testing of the waters. Mother. They look at me curiously now. Mother, waiting to see son, who was 29 years old and several hours late. The boys and Jim drop-kick the ball toward their house, and Susan lingers with me for a while. I like her. She smells of something clean, soap, good intentions. Where is he? I ask her, my voice like a tired child. I'm crying, nearly crying as this question, weighted as it is against years of waiting, against this late afternoon, hangs in the air between us. Susan hugs me. It'll be fine, she says. It'll be fine. 6 o'clock, 6:30, and we're back upstairs sitting at the kitchen table. I straighten the pillows, wash the last fork in the sink, throwing the I Ching of terror. My future card is the 6 of Cups. Riding the waves into shore, the horses and their riders experience joy and pleasure, a full-out expression of emotional intensity. I know about that one. Known it all my life. Today alone, I've looked out the window 364 times, and I've drunk more Shiraz, and I'm tired. I want to lie down and curl up with my dog. I want to call the whole thing off. I want it to be over with, and I want it to start again. And then we hear a car in the gravel parking space beneath our window. John's already standing there, because it was his turn to watch the road. It's them, he says, just like that. It's like this, the 16 steps down to the landing, and the outside door, the longest I've ever taken. Other books, not adoption ones, saccharine romance novels and paperback mysteries describe such moments. Her hands gripped the rough-hewn wooden railings. One by one, she inched her way down the steps to the landing where who knew what enormity awaited her. Absurdly, I'm thinking lines. I'm thinking lines at all. Andrew, I'll say. How are the roads? Is there much traffic? I'm thinking of becoming my mother. I'm thinking of glass beads on a string. I'm thinking of a heady treatise, an inquiry concerning political justice. Glass beads are a metaphor. We string them together, William Godwin says. The accumulation of our experiences of right and wrong, good and evil, on a string made of our lives. That's what I'm doing. My first memories of my son are of a young man. Well, that's obvious, you say. Less obvious, he's no longer a baby to hold in my arms, but an attractive man with blonde hair. He's standing at the bottom of the outside steps, his face averted, his feet in black shoes I find ridiculously stylish. The shoes are pointed card, ready to help him slip away. Like me, he wants to hide. Like me, he slides his hands deep in his pockets, stands to the side, awkward, uncomfortable with his own fair skin. His skin, I notice, is ruddy, skin of a blonde man with light blue eyes, who is Joe, my boy husband of years and years ago. He's Joe and me and somebody else, my father maybe, with my father's build, his chest and soft belly. I do not see my mother in my son's body. I do not think of my mother at all. I don't even think of myself as a mother. But for a space of seconds, I'm a woman outside myself, a woman vulnerable to desire, and I'm thinking how handsome he is. And I'm thinking I'm his mother, and I'm not, and I am. What did one anonymous mother say in one of the adoption books I bought? The only way, she said, she could ever really have him back in her womb was to be his lover. My Let's go inside, John says as he takes my hand, and my son and his sweetheart follow us in. So there's that. Man, I haven't read that in like a million years. So thank y'all for listening to that. And that was here. I mean, you can laugh. I don't feel so much better. That was really hard because it was all that time ago, and it was here. You know, it was here. And my son now lives a million miles away. He was in Beijing, in the other part of the world. So this brought him back, and that was kind of amazing, you know. Anyway, over the years, since when you're a child, I write and I write and I write. And I feel a little bit like years ago, I went to Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. Do y'all know what an art colony is? You go and you work on your work, and you're there for a month, and you're prisoner in your writing studio and you work. You know? So I'm there, but I got to know I'm always very drawn to the visual artists. I like the work of hands a whole lot. And there was this woman, and you go to her studio, and the pieces are enormous, huge, covering the walls. And there's a lot of them, you know, and there's some outside. And every single painting in some place, there was a tiny figure of a bear. And she said, every time I make work, every time there's this bear, and that is my father. And I'm working out my relationship with my father over and over and over with my father, and I still don't understand, but he's there. And I'm working out my relationship with my mother and being a mother, and so I write that again and again and again. In essays, and in this other book, I'm going to read a little bit from it. Some of you have read this. Who's read this for class? It's like enforced reading. Do you think, who's teaching you? Should we do a quiz now? Just checking. But I want to read a little bit of that. We're talking today about work, and who writes in here? Who loves creative writing? Can I see hands? Who likes revision? I see fewer hands. I like to think of revision not as one solid word, but as re-vision, revisioning. And I think it's a perpetual state, you know. I'm still revising this book. And this has happened from a whole sequence of readings that I've done. I showed this to some of you earlier. This is the page. I'm going to read from this. You're like, yeah, right. But look at this. I'm still revisioning. And I'm still tightening these words, so nothing is ever done. I really like that revisioning. I think that work is, in fact, a living being. And there isn't anybody I know on the face of this earth, including my oldest friend I've known since I was 8. It's in flux. It's growing. It's changing. It's altering. It's sometimes difficult, dark and light, all those things. It's alive. This, too, is alive. And I know that at some point I must leave it be, but I don't. So I'm going to read you a little bit of the prologue. This book, some of it takes place in 1973. That's when the prologue takes place. The main character is a woman named Miracel, here a girl named Miracel Loving, and her mother, who she calls Ruby. This prologue takes place on the night that her mother was shot. And Miracel comes to believe that the shooter might be the father she's never known. Of course, you can get into a weird place in your head thinking, she says she writes about mothers over and over again, and here's one that's shot. Let's go with that. I mean, just think about that separately if you need to take a break from the text. All right, is there anything else you need to know here? I don't think. This is from Morning Radiance, the prologue, 1973. And they're living in the most part of this prologue in a town called Dauncey, Kentucky. That was a word my mother always used. Dauncey means, she was sometimes a little dauncey about her eating, meaning reluctant. They're living in a town called Dauncey. She was my mother, but I called her Ruby, and I believed her hands were magic. She knew how to read cards and runes, how to find meanings in the shadows and photographs. Some people believe she could cast spells for anything from bringing a missing lover back to healing sickness, but I've never seen the proof of any of that. The only thing I knew for sure was that my mother was afraid, partly of her own fortunes, but I also knew she was afraid she would reveal the truth truth, I wanted most of all, my own father's name. She'd look at me, head to the side, laugh when I asked about our past. Just tell yourself we come from some long line of tale-tellers and fiddlers, she'd say. She also said you couldn't trust a thing like love, but I loved it anyway. The highway at night, the car windows down, the radio playing Jim Morrison. I love not knowing where we'd end up or for how long. It was the hottest spell on record in Dauncey. In the morning cool, I'd help her make love potions, help her mince stinging nettles and pawpaws, help her rummage through her things to find rattletails from snakes, bones of critters she found in the woods. Steam rose from the stove, and the kitchen was full of songs about wild horses. The potions simmered, and I painted her nails red as she gave me a sip of her sweet wine. In that notebook of hers, I read spell after spell, whispering her beloved's name 3 times to the night wind. Me, I wanted to be a singer in a nightclub in a city with a name I couldn't pronounce. I wanted coal around my eyes. I wanted chocolates from Paris, France. Some days I wanted to stay put long enough for some boy to love me, but the only charms Ruby ever gave me were little daily spells to make me safe, to make me bitter. Don't look at them boys like that, she'd say when we went someplace they had a jukebox. It was her doing the watching, her hands shoved deep in her pockets as we watched hips touching hips in time to the Eagles or Johnny Cash. Sometimes she disappeared for days at a time. When she came back again, her eyes were heavy with want. That night, That night, Ruby was antsy, and she paced beside the long shadows on the wall of the kitchen window. I sipped cold water and wished I could hold the ice in my palm, pretty as diamonds, pretty as Ruby, her black hair tied back with a red scarf, her face shining from the stove's heat. She draped a cloth over the lamp, lit incense in the neck of a wine bottle, set a record going, some woman singing the blues. Love me in the morning, love me at night. An hour passed, 2, with no one in sight. There's always somebody here by now, I said. Just don't you mind, she said. She set the record going a dozenth time. Love me in the morning, love me at night. Love me in radiance, honey, until long past midnight. As the trailer's heat let go, I took the kettle off the stove, filled jelly jars with the potion. By then it was 7 o'clock, and coal trucks shifted gears and headed past. I thought about how some nights it was women who came to our door, wanting to see how it felt to sit across a table with somebody with hands as wise as Ruby's. Her cards were full of love affairs, the foreign places they believed she'd seen. But they were afraid of one another, and they ought to have been the things she knew. By 10 o'clock, there was thunder, and from the trees at the back of the trailer came whippoorwills and the scratch of June bugs. A car door slammed as I hurried to the window. Out by the road, a tall shadow stood. "Who's there?" I called. Ruby turned her head to the sounds and waved me out. "I need to be alone for a spell, sugar," she said. "Go on now." And so I went, just to the chair beneath the mulberry tree in the yard, where I could see her shadow moving from stove to table. Feet kicked gravel as someone made their way on the trailer and the back door slammed. The only thing I really know about that night is what I imagined. Her scarf falling off, her hair falling as she moved. Dance with me. The record going full blast. Ruby recited love charms, 3 silver spoons of brandy wine, and you shall be mine, and you shall be mine. For years I would think of her hands held out, a card balanced there, the lovers. I see my mother's face, see the card I drew for you, then the shadow stood in front of Ruby, reached for her. Their voices crossed as lightning streaked the sky. From the open window they argued. A chair crashed down. The truth is, I remember some things and nothing at all from that night. I remember boots running out the back door as my feet carried me inside. I remember a floor strewn with glass and paper torn from my mother's notebook, gone missing as hard as I looked later on. I remember touching my mother, the place on the throat where a pulse would be. Hours later, questions filled the trailer. I sat at the kitchen table with the sheriff, saying the same thing over again. I heard footsteps, I saw shadows. They said I had to have seen something, and I wanted to tell them more. I wanted to tell them I was a hero. I pushed the chairs aside, picked up a broken bottle, and held it out, saving us both. From where and who I am now, I want to reach back and tell the truth, Ruby's and my own, from all the years since. I want to tell them about lovers who are only parts of themselves. One man, nothing but a boy who loved music so loud I could hear voices. Another man, nothing but the feel of a rough face against my own face. How raw the heart can feel. All the men, and years passing, and myself slipping through the spaces of years like they were a left open door I was never brave enough to shut. Most days, I no longer know who it is I'm describing and to whom. Whose future is it that I'm now living? Have I become her, Ruby loving, become my own lost mother? The truth is, the room is full of her blood scent in that song, Holy Radiance, Honey. The needle scratched as the song played down as I knelt beside her. She bled from the chest, and I wondered how small the hole was, how to tell it, the way body bleeds from a wound into forever. I held her, my ear next to her mouth, and listened. Sweet girl, she said, as I hushed her, made her promise not to die. How cool her fingers were, cold as rain. What I remembered forever was the sound of her breathing and love, taken for good from the underside of my heart. So there's that. So there's that, and there's what I'm telling you about writing this thing over and over and over again about mothers, a variety of mothers, myself as a mother, other mothers, trying, obviously, as Miracel is in this memory of all these years, who am I? Certainly that's what I think one thing that writers do. But I'm also trying really hard, especially as I wrote Wanting Radiance. We talked about it today. That took me right around 7 years, but it wasn't the only thing I was writing. In the midst of that, I've been writing essays. I've been teaching myself a lot about writing essays. I am, I believe, a very poetic writer, and there's a way to find a home for that in the world of essays. I love lyric prose very much. I love the lyric essay, the braided essay. So I've got a collection of those now. No, it doesn't have a cut date, but I'm sending it to 3 different, you're not supposed to do that. Do you multiple submit?
Oh yeah, of course.
So I'm sending it
Absolutely.
to 3 places next week. Of course, every time I look at it, I'm still finding things to change. But it's a collection of 12 essays called Long Ride Home. And they're about travel in many ways. They're about, I spent about 2 years with this former lover traveling around the world. And we were in a lot of places. One place that fascinates me, and I still want to go again, is India. Has anyone here been to India in this room? No one? Come on, you can lie or something. No? So one of the essays, it will at this point be the second in the book, and it's now called And Then the Holy River. And I thought I would read just a little bit of this to you. It's much too long. It's like 18 pages, so if you're chomping at the bit later to read the rest of it, I'm certain that some of your writing professors would be willing to ask me to send it on to you, or I could send it on to you or something. And Then the Holy River. And it has a sort of, I said epigraph at the beginning. Do you like Tina HD? So this is from HD, from Heat. Oh, wind, rend open the heat, cut apart the heat, rend it to tatters. What do you need to know here? It is a graded essay, so some of it is in the present time here of Varanasi, the holy city, but also known as Benares, and that's where there's the river Ganges, where many go to bathe and to bury the ashes of the dead. And then there's other parts that's about the past, and I wish to be a poet. And then there's also parts about this lover and meeting him, so you get a taste of that. So really, we're the first people to hear this period, so, yeah, thank you. Before Varanasi, there were poems. I told myself this as I lit incense, the temples of gods whose names I didn't know. We sipped hot tea to make our bodies sweat, to cool ourselves in the midday heat. You'd been my lover for 2 years, but I struggled to tell you about the things I loved. Poetry, I said, was essence. Essence of what, you asked? Poetry came first, I said, and it came before that. It was the essence of beauty. You wondered if poetry was always beautiful. Varanasi, the city of hunger, was not beautiful, and it was. It was the place of the holy river called Sindhu. The river descended once from a glacier, filled vast tributaries, was given the names of kings and conquerors. Words for the river traveled out of my mouth. Ganja, mother of forgiveness. In Varanasi, we stood looking at a man sitting in a wide lot filled with dirt and rocks, an umbrella over his head as he broke stones into gravel in the heat. I'll pause when I switch later. Once after 3 days on speed, my poems flew by themselves. They were lost in the words on the backs of bathroom stall doors. They were lines on the backs of napkins inside matchbooks. They were packed into bags that traveled to Arizona, to New Mexico. They grew alongside highways, beside roads headed east. They took themselves seriously in classrooms at big, fine schools. They learned names for themselves, Ghazal, Pantu, and Sidney. They reached inside hearts that refused to open. They became journeys. The woman alone in a diner, the woman beside the man on a bus. The poems were deserts and mountains and caves. They were a man's bare feet in a fire, the cooking pots in the city of Varanasi. We got to Varanasi on a school bus, riding a rooftop in a suffocating press of bodies and a heap of metal pipes. The bus careened down hills, took curves so fast I slid onto the girl lying sick beside a crate of chickens. The sun, yellow and mean, bore down as we rode through villages, all of us ducking under wires that sagged across the roads. God is great, someone called as I vomited from the edge of the bus into the white-hot day. They all sang, you sang too, though neither of us necessarily believed in God. You came from tiny Eucharist and real wine, silver cups, while I came from praise the Lord preachers and the laying on of hands. I followed you to Varanasi, city of heat and devotion, a pilgrimage I was trying to understand. My first poems were moments, a box fan blowing warm air across the living room, my mother on the couch, my father in his chair, me in the space between, learning to read the sadness of their faces. Later, their muffled voices from the other side of the wall, the hiss of arguing, review of the day, that day, all the days, a drawer sliding open, rearrangement of bodies, give of mattress, in, out, I love you like no other woman, a voice said, and then there was silence. Poems traveled behind the Plymouth Duster before the first boy drove, drifted into the rolled-down windows as we parked in a thicket of trees beside Highway 60 going west. The poems folded themselves small inside my pockets when I ran away from home. One poem wrote itself in that apartment in St. Louis where there was a knife and a boy. Jim, Michael, Wayne, Steve. Poems were made of boys, 1 and 2, and so on, until there were Ben, Donnie, Tom, Otis, Slack smelling of beer, and roadsides and hotel rooms where I wrote in empty pages at the backs of Gideon Bibles. There was the woman who wove shawls, who said my aura was blue, said I reminded her of the angel of death. There was a woman with sad eyes in a country music hall, a man who cried as we lay in the heat of his apartment, the rim of the canyon outside, piling up with snow. The points were wind blowing against a clackerless bell hanging from the eaves of the house I left, some lover watching out the window as I drove away. I met you at the foot of a giant volcano. The volcano was the main attraction at Green Gardens, a greenhouse next to Highway 29 North in Central Virginia. I was a student in a Master of Fine Arts program. I needed work, and so I was hired to help haul and dig and plant. Volcano was 40 feet high, a dormant mound of dirt and rocks, wrapped with plastic tubing that was supposed to release water to simulate lava. Isn't that amazing? You were kneeling at its base on that muggy August day we met. You were digging up irises to separate a plant. I remember studying the planes of your sunburned cheeks, the flat tips of fingers that would soon be inside my body. In the distance was a busy highway, all the cars. I waited as you interrupted the rhythm of spade and soil. I don't remember you asking my name, looking at me. You were working here, you said, until you were ready to head east. What about you? I didn't answer. I wanted the volcano to spew cool water and for us to stand in its shallow, dissolving the day's heat. Mornings we were listless as we walked through Varnassi's marketplace. Its pre-monsoon air thick with the scent of cayenne and curry. I touched the gold bindi on an elephant's trunk, a garland of jasmine around its enormous head. Lord Ganesh, said a woman with blackened teeth, and I remembered that he was the god of scribes and writers. We were in a guest house by then. Afternoons, the table where we ate was hot to the touch, and afterwards we met for hours in the blazing heat of afternoon. Evenings we wandered the streets, crowded with everyone too restless to sleep, crowded with music, with the angry eyes of stray dogs. Night, we got up every few hours to stand under a shower of warm water, slid naked as a fan dried us cool, leaving our sheets brown from the waters of the Ganges. Once, a few hours before dawn, I left you sleeping. When the balcony calls to prayer, prayer sounded. In the street, a legless man rolled by on a platform, and I held on to that sound, and to the sound of the woman wailing as she walked by carrying a bundle of straw on her back. The jangle of the bell on a bicycle, coughing for the man across the way, toss of water from his metal pitcher into the street. The world was a moan, an awakened sigh. I laid my hands against that sound, telling the day to wait a little longer. Soon I would go back inside and lie beside you, listening to your breath fall and rise until you woke. I'll stop there. Should I read one more piece? Let me know, should I do that? The next is very short. This is from the book that Clint mentioned, Voice Lessons. And this is probably 3 years old. This is called, from a piece called At Rest. And it's, there's 2 pages. There are 2 pages of it. And this is about burying my mother when she died. What you're going to find here is that, well, my mother, as Clint mentioned, has OCD, and the focus of her obsession is dirt, be it on my body or dirt in the world, be it coal dust on the wall, ashes in the air, dirt. And so when my mother died, I didn't mean it as a cruelty, but I was in South Dakota then teaching, and so she was cremated, and I bought a biodegradable urn to put her in. And this is in this piece, and with that means she went back to the earth. And there's, I must say, a certain irony there, or a resolution of some sort. I don't mean to, isn't it awful? I love the glass mountains that had to be climbed, the lost magic beads that had to be found in meadows. I came back to these stories as my mother entered the late stages of Alzheimer's. I drove to Floyd County twice a year to her nursing home to spend 3 or 4 days. As long as she could comprehend what they were, I would bring her gifts, gold foil chocolates, lotions for her drying skin. Later, when she was confined to bed, I read story after story aloud as she stared into the room without recognition. Gray fairy tales, Russian fairy tales. One of my favorites was called The White Princess. Because of the spell cast on her at birth by her wicked aunt, the girl child has no gravity. Her mother stands at a window watching her daughter float out of the earth. She floats above the palace gardens and the turrets and tower to a lake at the edge of the royal lands. She dips her feet in the warm lake water, shivers with delight, submerging herself. Only then does she have any gravity at all. I've looked for gravity my whole life, for human kindness, touch to break the spells of hurt and no love that have been my inheritance, driven miles, sat at tables, listened, taken notes, written the same story again and again about a girl child, floating through her life, unable to descend into the living world, unable to transform her past. Alzheimer's, with its gradual letting go of all the body's functions, was one of the darkest stories I confronted. Her words dwindled to a handful. Her body forgot how to eat, drink, breathe. She died in the spring of 2019. On the day I buried her, I stood with my cousins and the one surviving aunt in the cemetery beside Highway 23, listening as a preacher talked about what it is good women do. All the rising before dawn and surrendering to the Lord. Here I'm in the pulpit. I'd chosen to have my mother cremated, and I bought a cedar urn for her ashes. Over time, the urn would disintegrate, and I was giving my mother back to the dirt she always hated. I filled the metal vases on the tombstone with pink silk flowers and thought about the other graves 5 miles up the road, aunts, grandmother, grandfather. This, I thought, was what was left of the family that made me. In tales about magic, so many things can happen. A woman's spirit is buried in a wooden urn in a hole in the ground. Her spirit is crowded. She's restless, moving side to side to side in the dark, small space. There's no release after death, after all, and she feels despair about the smell of wet dirt. Time passes, rain and snow come. The wood decomposes as the spirit stretches out its spirit hands. When it's spring again, the darkness seems looser and has the taste of loam and roots. But much to her surprise, it also tastes like her own self, or who she has become. Spirit mixed with soil, mixed with a hint of light. Spirit eyes, which were shut for so long to blink, and she moves. Ah, my mother says, reaching up, poking through the daylight and air. Someday, I will come once again to the graveside to make my peace with the dead. There'll be another April morning, maybe 1 year or 2 or a dozen will pass. What to make of this world in which darkness and wounding have passed away? Dark light, dark light. Is there a way to write of joy in the aftermath of hurt? Coal trucks whoosh by on the highway. At my feet, I'll see the green shoots of daffodils pushing their way up. I'll be glad my arms are bare. Sunlight above the mountains feels so good. I will breathe, hold the air inside, waiting for what comes next. That is it. You keep standing on this box. I never get a chance to be tall. This is actually quite amazing.
Is it the select button? The mute button?
So
Hello?
now there are questions. Yes?
Yes, and I will bring the mic for anyone who wants it. You got it.
I think we're going to get up there. Thank you.
Hi. So it's clear that you've drawn quite a bit from your own relationship with your mother and your work.
I write a lot, you're saying I write a lot about my relationship with my mother and my work, yes.
So I guess my question is, how does one, draw upon and channel and maybe analyze one's own experiences in one's work, but maintain a healthy emotional distance therefrom?
The question is, how does one, over time, write about an experience that hurt deeply, and writing it in different forms, in many forms, and many instances over time, and how does one maintain a sane balance with reliving that experience? Is that what you're asking?
More or less, yeah.
I tend to very much believe I believe that writing, I believe that making art is a healing experience in and of itself. There's a book called Fearless Confessions, written by my friend Sue Williams-Silverman, and she talks about just that. And she talks about how you are no longer subject of trauma that has occurred in your life, in your background, the trauma that made you. Instead, you're not subject to, you're taking the experience and you're molding it, you're shaping it. I have many friends who are potters, and I think of it almost like that, taking this bare element, this clay, and shaping it on the wheel. You can make beauty. And I'm not saying that, I don't believe beauty in and of itself is always light. I think that beauty is made of light and dark. I think that art is made of light and dark. And I'm making this thing, I'm creating these words, shaping this experience of light and dark, and I'm creating something from it. It's taken from me and made, and so it's no longer here, trapped inside. That is my belief. A friend of mine is a poet from, he was poet laureate in the state of North Carolina, Joseph Batanti. One thing he has done for years, and I think that this addresses your question quite well, he teaches writing as healing for groups of Vietnam vets. Think about that, these men who have experienced great trauma, and they come to this, and there's a therapist in the room with them to help process experience, but they write these stories of unimaginable kinds of horrors that must have happened, and he calls it Writing is Healing. That's the name of the class. He's also offered that course in prisons as well. I think it's kind of an amazing thing. Anybody else? Come on, guys. This is your chance. I mean, I don't know. You can ask me most things. I'm not that truly answering. It's good, I guess. Yes.
Hi. So, what would your advice be if you have something, if there's a part of your identity that is on your heart to write about, that is a story you think is important to tell, but you don't know where to start, or you don't know if you're brave enough to admit it?
You don't know where, there's several things there. You don't know where to start, that's one thing. And you don't know whether you should write the story because are you worrying about others who are included in that story? Partly.
Yeah, I'm mostly worried because the story is about someone with neurodivergent, and
Who what?
it's the fear is about the stigma of neurodivergency and how people relate to finding When you get past the fear.
I mean, my father, who passed away a couple of years ago, I think I was talking about this in class today, or I was talking about it at some point today. Maybe it was in our meal or something. I remember talking about it with you even. But he didn't want me to write Surrender Child. He wanted me to write it as a novel. He wanted me to recreate the experience with myself as a birth mother in the form of fiction. And I had to say that it was my story and I was claiming my story. That's one thing. The other thing is my motive in writing something that hurts is not to hurt others. My story, I'm not writing it as an act of revenge. I don't know if I put it quite this way, but there's a creative nonfiction writer, William Zinsser, and he's talking about, mentions a list of books, including like Mary Carr's The Liars Club, mentions a series of books, horror books, but he believes sincerely that those books were written from the motive of love. Love in itself means a whole lot of things. It's not always pretty, but the motive there is to take the story, write it. It's an act of love to transform the story. As to where to begin, I mean, that was certainly a problem for me, because you're not really, you've got all these years of experience to write, but you're not really writing, you're not writing an autobiography, you're not writing the story of a life. You might be writing parts of a life. Sue William Silverman, who I mentioned, has now 4 memoirs. Mary Carr has 3. So she's writing parts of experience. It took me a while to figure out where to start the memoir. One of the things that I did was borrow form from Mary Carr. I read The Liars Club, and I love how that begins. It begins some years into her childhood on a night that her mother flips out. And then it stops, and it goes back before that in time. It goes and writes all that happened up till that night, and it goes forward. So one thing you can do is read a lot of books, read a lot of essays, read a lot of memoirs, study them for form. How do they begin? It's not like you're not stealing to plagiarize, certainly, but you're studying form, and that's the way to do it. Anybody? So Jim and Susan, how was it to hear your name yourselves in a book and being here that day?
Powerful. But also, it's nice that you immortalized Annabelle the dog.
Do you know that I now have a Carolina dog? Amazing. But I just love that you were there for that experience. Tina, you were there for that experience. Sandy, that's a beautiful thing to come back all this time later to this experience. Anybody have a question, another question? Don't be shy, please. Is something crazy? Oh, I'm sorry.
How do you deal with writer's block? Or how do you personally?
Well, I firmly believe that a couple of things. I believe it is possible to write through writer's block. Much as I get up some mornings, I work out a lot. I love to go to the gym and do a lot of cardio stuff, swim laps or whatever. And some days it's the last thing I'm going to do. I'm thinking, let's just take a nap, But you go and you work through it. I believe it is possible to write through writer's block. But I also believe that sometimes, I grew up with farmers, you sometimes let the soil be fallow. Sometimes there's the need to rest, So there's a difference between totally shut down and like thinking, great, let's go, it should be shut down. But it's also, look at the situation, it's different sometimes. There's the need to let the work rest before you come back to it. But I do believe it's possible to write through. There's that documentary I've mentioned to some of you today. Jim, have you seen that, The Rough South with Harry Crews? And in that film, there's the writer Larry Brown, and he's talking about Crews. And we're talking about basically writer's block. And he said, well, there's going to be sometimes you don't feel like writing, but you can go and sit there in front of the computer for 3 or 4 hours. You're still part of the process. You're still part of the discipline. Isn't that what he says? You just hear that voice. So what do you think about that? Anybody else? What time is it? Do we have time for like one or two more questions from anybody? Are you stretching or is that a question? Okay.
Okay, that's good. Have you ever dealt with like imposter syndrome? And if you have,
What it say, I unfortunately have lost all hearing in 1 year, so I have to make sure I'm hearing correctly.
Okay. Have you ever dealt with like imposter syndrome? And if you have,
Oh,
how do you
boy.
push through that?
Have I ever dealt with imposter syndrome? Like most days, yeah. I know. I do think that that's one of the things this book, Voice Lessons, is about. I mean, I come from, and I'm not kidding, I mean, I really come from a family, my mother's side especially. I mean, my mother finished high school, but her sisters did not. You know, I'm the first woman on both sides of the family to finish college. And actually, it's just sort of like, I don't know, I used to hear it put this way. You know, I come to do a reading, and I'm convinced that y'all in the audience are thinking, this is the way we used to say it in my family, like, who rented her? Like, really? And you really want me up here? You know? So, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
And how do I deal with that?
Yeah, how do you push through that?
I guess it's a matter of claiming my voice over time. It's a matter, and I really think that's one of the reasons I call this book Voice Lessons. It's a matter of claiming my experience. I'm proud that I'm the first woman on both sides of my family who went to college. One other woman taught elementary school. I'm proud of that. But back when I was a kid, you know, like in grade school, my mother's name is Pearlie Lee Basden. And I remember being a kid in grades like 4th grade in Mrs. Harnet's class. And we had to go around and tell our mother's name. What's your mother's name? What's your father's name? And I was like, some part of me like ashamed. My mother's Pearlie Lee Basden. It's not Mary Jane or something. You know, and I'm like, you know, I'm proud of that. I was like claiming who I am. And is that easy? And did it come to me immediately? And am I over it every single day? I'm sure not. But I think that it's possible to claim oneself. My friend Wendy Miles, a poet, she once said to me, you need to take your experience and let it blossom, a wicked and terrible bloom. And I love that way of putting it.
What's your favorite dinosaur and why?
Didn't we do this earlier and I couldn't think of the name of it and I was
Yeah, but you didn't answer why.
You know, the one that's in the Jurassic Park movie, the one where the kids are in the kitchen and they're like crawling on the floor to get away from the dinosaurs that come in. It's the dinosaurs that hold their arms up like this and go, ah, ah. You just wanted to see me do that, didn't you? What are they? Yes, I like those a whole lot. I mean, I know they're pretty lethal, but I also like the ones that are vegetarian. Okay. What's your favorite?
Spinosaurus.
Oh, okay. Yes. Mary.
We haven't had an in-person reading in a while because of COVID.
Yeah, I haven't done this in a while.
This tradition,
Like, these are actual people out here, not on Zoom.
this tradition has fallen to the wayside a little bit, I think, but I'm bringing it back. What is your opinion on Beyonce?
What is my opinion on the
Yes, please.
I don't know. I have no opinion. I'm not sure. You know, what is your opinion on Beyonce?
Oh, well, you're Queen Bee, right?
I don't have that. I wish I did. I'm sorry. She's not like at the center of my world in some way. I don't lust after her. There's that. Anybody else? Please, one last thing.
Good, I have something. I know I'm not a student. How do you write such beautiful lines, Karen?
How do I write?
Such beautiful lines.
I don't know. I mean, one time a person heard what I was reading and he said it was like entering a fugue state. That's a little disturbing to me. But I mean, in a way, it's like entering this sort of ecstatic state of the language. It's like I hear it hold them there and I can transcribe them. I think that's part of it. And I also think it's about going back to the lines over and over and over again and polishing them like gemstones, polishing them until they shine. And also it's about listening to voices, it's about listening to sounds in the world, and it's also listening to words. Read the language aloud, you know? Margaret Atwood says in some essay that we want from language, remember being a kid and hearing stories told? We want language on the page to be alive and a living thing, to be released into the world as a living presence. And I believe that lines have that power.
Awesome. And I think we're going to call it a night. Would everyone please applaud Karen so much?
Let's applaud for you too. Applaud yourself.
As I mentioned, there are books for sale in the back, and if